I got a call from a guy in ministry. We'd met like one time. And so it was kind of out of the blue. He said, hey, I got a word for you from God in prayer today. I said, oh, what's that? And he said, God said, you've been building the kingdom on your own power and on your own terms. And he's now inviting you to build his kingdom with his power and on his.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast, where we discover how to run your business like a saint. Today, we are speaking with Tim Glemkowski, the current Executive Director at Amazing Parish, past CEO of National Eucharistic Congress, and author of the co-author of one book and the author of another book as well. Most of Tim's career has been oriented around building strong parishes, often specifically in helping priests to articulate their vision for the parish and then executing the transformation of the parish as well. And, as you probably know, this is something I am quite passionate about. I've been talking about on the podcast a lot recently, which is how we as Catholic business owners can help to build strong parishes so we have a strong community as the center and kind of anchor of life as a Catholic. And that's exactly what we spent a lot of time today talking about. And on top of this, Tim also has some amazing frameworks for how to think about doing ministry work versus entrepreneurship, because he's actually considered entrepreneurship many, many times instead of ministry, and he's started his own businesses as well. So he's got some great thought processes there. And then he also talks about how God sometimes destroys things in the flood to help make space for the next thing. And this was a really interesting reflection he gave that I thought meant a lot to me as an entrepreneur and can mean a lot to you as well. And then on top of that, he does have some very interesting reflections on how to approach prayer as a busy business owner as well. There's many, many other topics in there, but those are some of the core ones I wanted to highlight at the beginning. One thing before we get into the show, if you are looking for a community of other Catholic entrepreneurs, consider joining the Catholic Founders Guild today. It's $10 a month or $100 a year. Just click upgrade to paid in Substack today and find your network of other like-minded Catholic entrepreneurs that you can learn from, spend time with, and get to know on your journey as well. All right, enjoy the episode. All right, Tim, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sorry, I realize it is a little early for you in Denver there, but I hope you don't mind.
No, not at all. No, yeah, rise and shine. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to be up early, right? I try my best, but usually I get my best work done late at night, so I end up working super late, and then it's a little bit of a slog to get out of bed.
Yeah, some people are morning people, some people are night people, I guess. I'm not sure if I'm either, but probably more. Our kids have always historically been like 4 a.m. risers.
Oh wow,
we have a 2-year-old still, and that's just their like we've never figured out the like. We have some friends that are like, oh yeah, they go to bed at 7, they wake up at 7. That's just not our game. So.
Man, those parents who have that down, like we have a friend of ours who she gets her kids to sleep perfectly, and I'm like, I just don't understand it. But we have a 7-month-old, so we're still getting the hang of it. But
envy, yeah.
One thing that's interesting, I just thought of this beforehand, is that my last name is a German name, but I always thought I was German growing up, and then I did my like ancestry, and I found out I'm mostly Polish. So we've got that in common, actually.
Many of the great saints of the 20th century, Polish. Like I think it was cool. I was at an event this summer in Italy, and I met some guys from Gdansk, these like young apostolic leaders who are like doing all this work there. That's the Solidarity movement in Lech Walesa, like basically the shipyards there and the unions that like overthrew communism. So there is like and Poland is kind of like on the up and up too even now. I just saw they're about to pass UK and like total GDP and all these things. So it's a good time to be Polish.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say it's really, really beautiful. Like it's kind of like the new place to visit instead of Japan is Poland. But
is Poland? Okay. Yeah.
But anyways, man, for people who don't know who you are, give us just a kind of a quick intro to who you are and what you're doing today.
Yeah, so I'm from outside Chicago. I grew up in the western suburbs, and have really been. I went to college at Franciscan University of Steubenville after having a big conversion when I was 18, and from a Catholic family, but my personal conversion, and have really been in ministry since. Felt a call to ministry. I was a political science major going into college. I wanted to go to law school, and then the Lord really showed me that He wanted me to be part of the renewal of the church, to help more Catholics encounter Jesus and give their whole life to Him. And so everything's kind of been guided by that since. So I've done a lot. I've taught high school theology. I've worked at a couple parishes. I know we're going to talk about some of the ministries that I've been part of kind of founding, but this is just kind of the plow that the Lord has given to me is how to help be part of what I think is a revival God is bringing to His church in this time. So that's led us a lot of different places and to do a lot of different things, but that's kind of the through line through it all.
Yeah, I mean, one of the core things that you've been doing, it seems, if I understand this correctly, is you've really had a strong focus on helping create strong parishes and strong kind of lively communities. I've been very passionate recently about thinking how can Catholic business owners help to create strong parishes. So, before we kind of get into all this, I do want to just have you give a summary of what you think that business owners can do. Like, what are the core things that need to happen in a parish to make it strong, and how can business owners in that community play a role?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it's in some ways it was unexpected for me. It just grew as a conviction over time that yeah, so everything, right? Like just the problem in some ways of like growing up Catholic and being part of communities where like for the most part it was a cultural reality, not necessarily, something that was lived out of like conviction or personal faith, like in a way that would lead us to follow sort of the entire, all the mandates of the gospel, like kind of be arrested by that in some ways. It kind of plagued me for a while as I got into ministry and through college. And so it led to kind of this, I think what's the parish system, is unique in some ways to our time, right? It's in its current sort of iteration is like a more recent invention for the church, meaning like the last like few hundred years,
Hmm.
but it reflects kind of this like hyper local focus of Catholicism. Like I think this is one of the beautiful things that people are discovering about the Catholic faith now is we have this long historical imagination of what sort of leads to human flourishing. And we have archetypes and examples of that in sort of these, European communities or different. So I think we live in this hyper atomized culture right now. It's like all about the sort of individual. We go into our suburban homes, shut our garage doors, don't talk to our neighbors, key into our apartments. Like, and really this doesn't lead to like human connection and flourishing. Like even brain, chemistry, like oxytocin requires eye contact and physical touch to actually have like a sense of bonding with other human individuals. So we have this like tech and technological developments, whether it's the car or the cell phone, right, have led to this very isolated, culture. And I think in some ways, Catholicism is so sticky and so lasting because as much as we have a hierarchy, we're actually like hyper decentralized in our structure. Like each pastor in each parish, in each diocese and each local church really is like the ultimate unit of the Catholic Church. And because of that, I think we can provide a pretty powerful counter witness of what it looks like to live the faith, not just as like a sort of intellectual exercise alone, but actually as a lived experience of like a people who are seeking after holiness and mission and community together. So you see these examples in the monastics, right, as like a bastion of renewal when the Roman Empire falls, or in the history of the church. But today, I think people are craving that so much. And business owners by temperament are typically builders. They're typically doers, like people who want to do stuff. And that's usually what it takes at a parish. Like certainly Amazing Parish, like we were really big on like renewal of a parish really does depend on leadership and in some ways, sort of inside out or top down renewal is what we typically lead. But I have seen parish communities where there's just a groundswell of Catholic families who are wanting to do this whole life thing differently and this whole faith thing differently than maybe our parents' generation or generations before. And I think that's the kind of stuff someone needs to go first in doing that. You know what I mean? Someone needs to be the rallying kind of galvanizing point for that, who's willing to do something thoughtful. And so business owners, I think, are an easy fit for kind of investing in their local parish community in that way.
Yeah, because this is the dilemma. I think a lot of the people I talk with are always going back and forth on. It's like, well, shouldn't it be the job of the priest to at least kind of from the pulpit say this is what we need to do, and then allow the people to follow and answer the call, rather than having to go convince the priest that we need to do this, and then get their buy-in, because you don't want to just start doing things necessarily without their approval, right? So do you see, it sounds like from what you just said, there are times where it goes both ways. Sometimes it's from the top down from the priest, and sometimes it's maybe from the community.
Yeah, and yeah, kind of meet in the middle. And certainly that's our work with Amazing Parish is like
Hmm.
helping priests lead. Because I think a lot of priests, especially younger priests who are coming into leadership, similarly want to live parish community in a way that fits our apostolic time. I think that's one of the paradigms that really makes sense of a lot of what we're dealing with is that we're living in a cultural moment that has more familiarity with like sort of the early church's situation than like high Christendom in some ways, which doesn't mean we eschew all of sort of the richness of the church's tradition, our ways of our practice and ways of life. But it does mean we understand that, that's the dominant paradigm in the culture is sort of secularism and secularization and these anti-gospels that John Paul II talked about, which I think the radical individualism is one of them. And so we push against those however we can find them. Pastors, I think, want to live that way. I think laity want that kind of leadership. I think it's often about finding, the way that the two kind of dance together. But yeah, I mean, you look at Francis, right? Rebuild my church in the Middle Ages. Some of the monasteries have become kind of lax, like sort of comfortable. He's called to a radical form of gospel living that's going to renew the church from the inside out. And in a lot of ways, he didn't wait for permission, right? So yeah, certainly in a parish, like a parish is the purview in many ways of a pastor and his leadership. But I think that question of, whether we have a supportive pastor and living that or not, that question of how do we live the gospel in this time, in this apostolic age, radically in a way that is actually compelling to other Catholics and to the world around us, is a question that we have to wrestle with in our communities. So yeah, I think it's a both and. I don't think it's like you don't want to just like try to do stuff at the parish that the pastor is like against and sort of pretend you're persecuted then. It's like, well, that's their parish, like they are the leader of it. But I think we can't let that question die just because we're necessarily not seeing it lived out in our parish communities. So I think there's ways to do it that are, we had a priest in college who was trying to teach a lot of us like really young, exuberant Steubenville people about like leading renewal in the church. And he would always tell this story of, it's a long story, but basically it ended with this point of like, love the people and they themselves will smash the idols. And I think that's an important principle in all this, is like, there's ways to do it that are smart and thoughtful.
Yeah. Now, I think the framework to me is that I like to approach it with is that, as lay people, we're primarily called to evangelize in the world, not necessarily in the parish, but we have to be partakers in the parish life because we cannot have a strong community to lean on if we're not also participating. And I know a lot of people are busy, I get it, but there needs to be commitment in being involved. Otherwise, you'll never have, this is I think about this, right? Some of the people I've grown up going to church with, I don't really know much about them. Like I've literally grown up going to church with them and I still don't know like the nuances of the struggles they go through because we just go to church with each other and we don't go deeper than that in terms of relationship building. So it's the same thing with business, right? In business, you really want to get to know your customers so that you can, send them a nice bouquet of flowers on their wedding anniversary or whatever it is, right? And these kind of like small touches, right? You mentioned that this form or this version of the parish is a relatively new invention with the last couple hundred years. Do you have context of what it used to look like? I'm just curious if you know some of the history that you could share.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of like anything with Catholicism, it looked a lot of different places all over. I guess I mean, sort of what the context today, at least in the American church, which in some ways itself is unique, right? Like you go to different countries and I've worked with a lot of different parishes from around the world, like Argentina and France, and like the idea of a big church, big parish with a lot of money, relatively speaking, a multi-million-dollar nonprofit that has 20 staff people, which isn't everywhere, but it is a lot of places, that has, sort of the way we do priestly assignments, and like that is newer than you'd think, right? That's the church in the 400s isn't actually operating that way, or even the church in the Middle Ages, right? So that's kind of more what I mean is.
So it was smaller. You're saying like there was probably a lot more smaller parishes?
Yeah, a little bit more small, a little bit smaller, a little bit more local. I mean, some of that is demographic changes, right? Like for a long time, people lived either in urban areas and they had, sort of urban chapels or urban parishes, or they had, they were in towns, like in villages, and they had the farms all around it and they would come to it. And so as demographics have shifted, it's also shifted like the structure of the parish in some ways, where people are driving from 15 minutes around to go to a parish of 3,000 families. And that's all very unique and sort of anomalous to our time.
Okay, got it. Yeah. No, that's interesting. I think it is fascinating to just consider. I've talked with somebody else about this on the pod about how we should build communities again that are, actually built together instead of these kind of suburbs that are spread out, where we try to get our Catholic friends all in one area so that we can bump into each other. And, if you need some sugar, I'm right there, like whatever, like you're close to each other. Because right now, even in the town I live in, we're a very, very strong community generally with our parish. And people still have to drive all the time to get to see you. It's not like you can just accidentally bump into them. Like I'm closer with some of my neighbors who are not Catholic than I am with some people at church because I see them all the time. So I would love to get a movement to rebuild these communities, but that's maybe down the road.
Yeah, if there's any business owners listening, I do think, to your point, like it's going to have to be in some ways like the developers, like Catholic developers who actually want to say the European model. I think when everyone visits there, we're sort of fascinated by it as Americans. We were just in Italy for 3.5 weeks with our kids. I had some work to do near Rome, and we spent some time there. And yeah, you're like, going to the same like it's just a very communal way of living. There's things we'd have to give up, right? Like we like our big houses and our big yards, and that does inherently lead to, like some of our American, there'd be things we'd have to give up in order to have that. But yeah, we've had similar conversations with our friends of like, can we find a really cool walkable neighborhood and we all just move in there, and then you can pop down to the pool all together instead of it being like, everything, at 3, can we text and I'll meet there or whatever. So I for sure I think the suburbs are like the death of culture in some ways. And so
I'm very anti-suburbs. To me, it's either like completely live in the country or live in the city. Like that's it.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the founding story then, because you now work, if I understand correctly, I got to make sure I got this right. So you work with Amazing Parish now, but in the past that you had founded Revive Parishes, and I think you say it's called L'Alto Catholic Institute. So tell us a story about founding those and why you were called to do that specifically.
Yeah, I think in some ways, like I'm kind of an accidental founder. I do think I've learned even more over time, like that my family was very entrepreneurial. Like my mom's side of the family, that's how we got to Chicago. Was they came in through New York City, Irish immigrants in the 1830s, and then made their way down to Maryland, and then my like great grandpa came out to Chicago to buy a hotel on the South Side after the Chicago World's Fair in the Columbian Exposition in 1893 or 1892 or whatever it was. And he ended up through the Great Depression. He like housed the whole family, and so that kind of started a lot of the family journey and story. So I do think it's in me in some ways. But I think for me, I was working at my home parish actually outside of Chicago, and we had lived in Denver and lived in Ann Arbor, which are two cities that had been very impacted by the presence of lay apostolates locally that can be sort of a catalyst to the church, like operating semi-independently, right? But adjacent to the church, and just had a lot of great friends locally who had a lot of gifts. And so we started this apostolate just to be sort of a leaven locally. I'm an agent of renewal. So we did something called the School of Prayer that was teaching on the interior life. We would do parish missions locally. And then we developed this initiative called the Parish Partnership, which is like, we'll embed with you for 9 months and help you sort of reset toward mission with your leadership team. And so we were just doing a lot of that work. And then in particular, that parish partnership piece, we just started to get a lot of requests from other parts of the country to do it. And so eventually there was like a period of time, 4 months, where my wife was still working, she still works part-time as a nurse, but she was working a little bit more, like 25 hours a week or whatever as a nurse. And she had call shifts, and, I was working at the parish full time and doing this work with L'Alto Catholic Institute on the side, which just me, this Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati to the Heights versus L'Alto. That's kind of where we got it. I kind of call the parishes to the Heights. Over 4 months, it was like we'd eaten dinner together 3 times or something, like it was just handing babies back and forth and running around like crazy. And so she finally sat me down and was like, hey, either God is showing you that he wants you to do this like full time and you have to fundraise to do that, or like you got to cut it. Like it's either like we can't keep doing this. And she was very right about it. And so it took a leap there. And it was one of those kind of powerful moments where that whole summer I remember fundraising and to launch into full time at the end of the year, and felt very like clearly convicted that the Lord was saying I had to leap. Like there had to be some trust, like some skin in the game, like to take a risk on him. And so I did. I went into my pastor, who was like an old family friend, and I said, hey, this was like August 1st, end of the year. Like I'll help you find my replacement, but I got to go do this work full time. I think the Lord is showing us that we have to do this. And after that, I had fundraised exactly $0 up to that point. Like just nobody wanted to take a chance on this 27-year-old kid who was like trying to do something for the church. Within 2 weeks, we had fundraised like over 100% of our 2018 goal, or whatever. So it was kind of a cool story of like trust and faith and being led by God. And then, Revive Parishes, I've been asked to build a learning platform with the Augustine Institute and Amazing Parish, which is funny now, like being involved in it. We're building a platform to train parish leaders. And so they needed someone to kind of come in and basically launch the project. So I was a co-founder on that project as well, too. So in some ways, it was just like, a lot of our story has been the story of like invitations and God just leading. I always say, like, I think I gave my life very sincerely to Jesus at age 18. And I think he just took me at my word, because the rest of it has been in some ways just, certainly we've been open and responsive to his plan, but a lot of it in ways that we didn't necessarily expect.
Yeah, no, I like that. I appreciate the stories there. So it sounds like these were nonprofit entities, and I guess I'm just out of curiosity, was that kind of the only route you thought about going, or did you think, hey, maybe we could turn this into like a for-profit business where we don't charge a lot, but we can still help these parishes? I'm curious if you had any of those thoughts.
Revive was technically structured as a for-profit that we had. There was a service and a product around it. We all had equity in it. You know, it was
Hmm.
more, we had received investment like venture capital to launch it. So that was actually more the structure there. You know, and I've always kicked around. Like I actually do think in some ways the nonprofit model has strengths, but it also has weaknesses, right? In terms of it can encourage certain behaviors and like mindsets that aren't helpful. And so a lot of my projects, like the last, you know, especially the Eucharistic Congress and Amazing Parish, I've always almost tried to approach them with like a for-profit mentality that then also has the blessing of being able to receive philanthropic support to continue its mission. Because I think you can get down rabbit holes of like chasing donor dollars,
Yeah.
chasing, you know, and doing things that aren't necessarily in your mission, but so yeah, I think there's today, I'm actually very intrigued by sort of like Catholic entrepreneurs that are trying to build projects that build businesses that provide jobs for people that don't necessarily run on philanthropic support. But yeah, for certainly L'Alto, the Eucharistic Congress, and
Hmm.
just because so much of the business model depended on some philanthropic support, there was probably no way to do it, you know,
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because to me, it's either you do nonprofit and you approach it more of like a for-profit mentality, like you said, or you do a for-profit and you recognize that, listen, like profits are not the end goal all, at all costs, right? You must always treat the employees well and focus on this is for the employment of yourself and for the families that work with you. And it sounds very counterintuitive to the business world when I talk about it that way. But there was, and I'm planning to have this guy come on the show at some point to talk about this. But there was this model a long time ago called ecclesiastical ventures, where the purpose of existence was to help all of the employees and the business owners to get to heaven. So they even like worked the faith into their daily routine, and they said, hey, if we make money, we make money, but we put it in God's hands. We're gonna try to make money, but that's not going to be the end all be all. So I'm curious if we'll ever get back to that model as the core thing.
Yeah, we forget too that like for most of human history, like small business, which are for-profit ventures, have been the driver of, like still today, right? Like I
Hmm.
think more people are employed in small business than anywhere else, and we've kind of adopted. I like this idea of, you know, in the time of Jesus, right? There's Athens, like the center of philosophy. There's Jerusalem, which is in some ways, you know, like the holy city, you know, for the Jewish people, and then there's Rome, which is the center of worldly power. I think today you'd probably talk about like San Francisco and New York, right? In some ways, LA is entertainment, New York is finance, San Francisco is venture, but tech and venture capital and that whole world, like I don't think we've paid enough attention yet as a church. I think Pope Leo is helping with this. Some of his focus on AI to like what a dominant cultural driver that is. And I think in some ways we've thought of all for profit. You know, I've seen this in the church a lot. Like people bring me projects all the times, and it's like we're going to 100x and get a bunch of venture capital, and everyone's going to make millions of dollars. And it's like, what about running a dope business that just employs a lot of people and you make a good living on? But it's not necessarily just like, you know, we have to. And I think we saw even in the late 2010s how a lot of that model, like it did start to break businesses too. You know, you
Yep.
Theranos and people are being dishonest or WeWork. Like I think
Hmm.
in some ways we saw the rise and fall already of some of those Silicon Valley ways of doing business that I think people are, you know, yeah, we shouldn't just like adopt some of those models wholesale into some of the ways we think about Catholic ecclesiastical ventures, as you put it, because there's good to learn from Athens, there's good to learn from, but we can't just copy paste.
Yeah, no, this is actually interesting. My whole interest in getting into the technology space in the first place was, and actually the origin of where this project came from was me getting into tech and seeing the WeWork story, and I was like, how can they be around for 10 years and not profitable? And then there's all this kind of like, yeah, dishonesty around it. And then I was like, if Jesus was a CEO of this business, it would not be like that.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
where the kind of the original idea came from back in like 2019 when I started thinking about this. It's interesting that you brought that up as well. What was the hardest part for you about leaving something that you had kind of founded and going to work for other people? Because you had been hired in a couple of roles after that. What was the hardest part about leaving that behind?
Yeah, I think in some ways I don't work well for other people. You know, like I think I'm one of those entrepreneurs that just like I'm in the church working in ministry because like I want to help. Like I'm not a career ministry guy, if that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
I'm here every time I've made a switch, I've always looked at you know, either buying a small business or like switching to, you know, like I've always done both discernments. Like, our Lord, are you still calling me into ministry? Not just like by default, I'm supposed to be like a church worker the rest of my life. And so for me, this is a story I've only recently started telling more, but so I started Lalto, started Revive Parishes, and Revive launched in 2019 and was getting a lot of good press. And I'd written a book kind of on our work with Lalto that came out in 2019. And I remember like thinking I was giving talks at some of these conferences I'd always wanted to, like sort of like I felt very important in some ways. And I was just 30, like it just felt really like a high point in terms of life. And then we had a lot of personal suffering in our life. My wife's mom died young, and we'd found out we were pregnant with our third, which wasn't a moment of suffering, but just kind of a big thing, and some other things that happened that and so in the midst of this, like there was a growing sense of, in some ways, how we had just been on this conveyor belt of kind of like doing the next thing that we felt like the Lord was putting in front of us. And it had left us in a place that we weren't necessarily happy with in terms of like our family life and all these different things. So I was wrestling. There was a tension with me anyway. But also at the same time feeling like this is everything I'd wanted to do. Like I've already done. I don't really know like what more, out there in some ways. And I got a call from a guy in ministry who runs an apostolate, and we'd met like one time and talked about some potential collaboration. So it was kind of out of the blue. I get this call on my phone from him, and I pick it up, and he said, "Hey, I got a word for you from God in prayer today." I said, "Oh, what's that?" And I said, "Do you mind me sharing it with you?" I'm sure, yeah. And he said, God said, you've been building the kingdom on your own power and on your own terms. And he's now inviting you to build his kingdom with his power and on his term. Cool. Like, great. So thanks, And he said, I said, was there anything more? And he said, yeah. He said, a flood is coming, but you and your family are going to be okay. He's building you a home on Mount Zion. I remember he said it that way. He's building you a home on Mount Zion, right? But the key point of it was like God was going to sort of send this flood that would then have us come build the church like and surrender to his plan for it. And so then COVID hits in March 2020, right? And so there were issues with one of our projects, and then there was a COVID hits, and Lalto basically was all on-site speaking and consulting, and parishes didn't have offertories, so they're cutting contracts. I've got dioceses and parishes not just cutting contracts, but reaching back out to me and saying, hey, like the deposit we paid, you have to pay us back, and all this stuff, like just crazy, and we really experienced it as like God is calling us to do something new and to be open to something new. And so that I was basically like effectively unemployed for 6 months. My wife couldn't work. She was a nurse, and she got like really bad, that sort of OG COVID. There was a guy who came down from Vail, skier from Australia, who had this respiratory disease in late February 2020 that they like didn't know what it was. He's coughing on everyone. They're not wearing masks or anything. And she got really sick. She was like running 104 fever, so they wouldn't let her work. And we were kind of just like locked down for 6 months of like, I'm looking for jobs, but unemployment's at 20%. I'm trying to pray about like, is God still calling me into ministry, this whole thing? And then that summer, Archbishop Aquila called me here and said, hey, we read your book, and I heard you might be looking for a job, and will you come in and have a meeting with me? And basically the pitch was like, I want to move the Archdiocese to mission. Like there's a lot of good and like it's a healthy church here in the Archdiocese of Denver, but I really want us to just be more focused on mission. And I want you to come help me. So I reported directly to the Archbishop, and I had no direct reports. I would joke my job title was just other duties as assigned, and it was just about like, so we built Archbishop as first leadership team. I facilitated that team. We worked with the group to Acts 29 to help kind of move the diocese to mission. And around the same time, I'd been asked to ghostwrite a project for the USCCB, a resource. And so that introduced me to Bishop Andrew Cousins, who invited me to be on the Committee for Evangelization and Catechesis as a lay consultant right when they were starting the Eucharistic Revival Project. So like the Lord kind of like sent the flood to destroy everything to free me up to work both here locally. And I learned a lot working for the Archdiocese, but also then I led the initial strategic planning for the Eucharistic Revival, was eventually hired to be the CEO of the Eucharistic Congress. Like in retrospect, I tell the story now partly because like in retrospect, I can see exactly what his plan was, but at the time it was like super painful. So in some ways it's like, if I'd had it my way, I'd still just be running my own thing. And have no, sort of no kings, but the Lord made it very clear that he had a different plan and a different path. And so learning to temper my own entrepreneurial energy. And then the Congress, I left the Congress just because I was super burned out, so I was about a year in advance, I told them like, hey, our plan was always build it in a way that we could carry it forward, that there'd be like momentum to start doing Eucharistic Congresses every 4 or 5 years. But when I came in, it was like no staff, no money, no like anything, like, and so we had to just build it from zero. So I was like on an airplane like 15 nights a month to just like raise the money and hire the people and get the word out and build all the logistics and all that stuff. And so I told him like, I can't be that guy. Like I have to go see my kids. My daughter's 9 now. You know what I mean? These are like some of the most important years of our life to be around home for. And I just can't, I'm not going to like sacrifice my family on the altar of my mission. And so we looked for my replacement that whole year and eventually, so like, again, each situation, it's almost been like very clear being called into it and then being very clear being called out of it, which has been a very important part of, I think, God's path for us is sort of like that. It is more this like Pauline kind of mission of like doing different things to help the church. But yeah, I mean, it's not easy. You know what I mean? It's not easy like starting over in multiple situations, and it's not easy. People talk, you know what I mean? People are like, oh, like why, like what's, you know, and people get stories about like what's going on and stuff. And you just kind of have to like, I belong to God. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not here to like please man or be like just like a church figure. Like I'm just trying to do the Lord's will. And so that's easier said than done. But yeah, it's I'd say the story of transitions, of leaving and starting projects, of going from the freedom of entrepreneurialism to, you know, having bosses again and stuff like that. All of those are tensions that we've had to navigate.
I appreciate there's two things that I just think are really worth re-highlighting there for anybody listening is this one, that when you said the flood came and destroyed everything so you could do other things. This is what we have to try to keep in mind, that if our entrepreneurial endeavors do come to an end, or they feel like, you know, this is just, I can't keep doing this, there are times for that, right? And I think that when I started my own business, I expect fully that there may be a time in the future where God says, hey, this is no longer the thing, and that's fine. Like I'm not going to tie my identity to it, because I know that there's perhaps more than that. Because even in my life already, there's been so many times where God put me in situations or put people in my life that ended up leading to something later on. Like you said, it makes sense in the retrospect. But when you originally started, you're like, I don't know what's going on, right? So we just have to trust God's providence, because we don't know all the steps. Even as entrepreneurs, we like to know the steps, but we don't. So we just got to accept that He's guiding us. And then that last piece is that we don't have to worry about what other people think, right? We just do the thing that we're called to do and try to set aside the opinions of man, because otherwise it could lead us to just seek to climb the corporate ladder.
And I think it limits our impact. I think when we start doing things to please man and not God, like we stultify our own ceiling in terms of like, it's only in surrender to God fully that you can actually like do everything He's calling you to do. And I think that's where people start to make concessions in their heart that they don't even realize because of their worldly motivations. So it's the gospel, and, you know, it's mixed. And that really, I think it really does, like, that's where a lot of the devil, right? The angel of light idea. Like the devil at a certain point in your life isn't going to tempt you with like mortal sin, because you're aware enough to know, like, but he is going to tempt you with sort of the half-heartedness we all wrestle with. And so, yeah, I think that's very true.
Yeah. So you wrote a book. I didn't get a chance to read it, but it's called Made for Mission. And could you just give us a quick synopsis of that really quickly before I go to the next question?
Yeah, so I've written 2 books. So the first was with Lalto. We'd applied for a grant from our Sunday Visitor for our work. And when they looked at our grant proposal, they were like, why don't you write a book about this? Like, I think people are looking for a conversation about parish renewal that's very practical, that's very like in the how of like the work, what you've learned from working with parishes, but also has like a kind of a rich Catholic imagination to it. That isn't like just saying, here's what Protestant megachurches are doing, and we should do that in our Catholic church, but it's actually like, what does it look like for a Catholic church to move to mission and to actually orient all of its efforts to making disciples, while also being, you know, distinctly Catholic and speaking from the heart of the church on it. So that was kind of, you know, so I remember they said like, we can publish it in the fall, but you have to finish it in the next month. So I just woke up at 4 a.m. and wrote from 4 to 9 a.m. every day for a month. And, you know, like in retrospect, you're like, I'm always like, it's funny. I don't know if you feel this way about any of your like, you know, projects, but I'm always like, man, there's so much I would do so differently in that book now, you know, 6 years later. And then I read it and I'm like, it's not that bad. You know what I mean? But you just do, you learn and grow. I think I was 29 when I wrote it. So, and then the second one was for the life of the world. It was a reflection on the charism of a Eucharistic missionary for the Eucharistic revival with Bishop Andrew Cousins. So we co-wrote that as well too, leading into the Congress. Yeah, those are kind of the 2 books I've written.
Yeah, so on the topic of the mission one, the one thing I oftentimes, I don't have a framework for thinking about this yet, but I consider it, is that there's a lot of people who are very well-meaning Catholics who want to be in a missionary role, right? They really want to be part of the revival of the church. But I also think that a lot of those people would be better off starting businesses and then just integrating the faith into their business. So I'm curious if you think that, if you've observed, that a lot of people who end up in missionary work should, you know, they're actually called to entrepreneurship, but they're just kind of avoiding that because it doesn't seem as interesting.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, as I tell the story sometimes, like this is to answer your question, I was in seminary for a year right after college, and it just felt this desire to give my whole life to God and this desire to bear fruit with my life. And I remember bringing to my spiritual director like 6 months into seminary because like really felt called in some ways to be there, really wanted to be there. And then the closer I kind of got to the like discernment is always in specifics, right? You're never discerning marriage. You're discerning like this girl. Am I called to marry this girl? You know what I mean? Or this guy. Like, the closer I got to like specifically what priestly life would be for me, I was like, oh, I don't think I'm actually called to this. But it was this tension for me because I'd felt like a real desire for it. And so I remember going to my spiritual director one day and I said, it kind of brought him this problem of like, I thought I was supposed to be here, but like, I don't think I'm actually called to do this. But like, how do you make sense of that in your mind? And I remember he's this old Polish priest, Father Glemkowski, and he said to me, he said, well, why do you want to be a priest? Why do you feel like you're called to be a priest? I said, well, Father, I met Jesus when I was 18. I want to give him my whole heart. Like, I just want to live for God alone. I don't want to hold anything back from him. He said, great. Like, what else? And I said, well, I think about, the guys on the football team from high school, and they all grew up Catholic. And I feel like in meeting Jesus and living, in the midst of his church, like the fullness, I'm finding the life and life to the full that we're all made for. And I can't believe that this isn't everywhere. That like, this is like sort of like, if you find these pockets of Catholicism where this is like sort of the story of the faith, you have this. And if not, you don't have it. Like, I want to be part of the renewal of the church. Like, I want more people to meet Jesus. And he says to me, great. Well, so you'd say you want to be holy. I said, yes, Father. And he said, you want to be on mission. I said, yes, Father. Like, you get it. Like, exactly. And he said, great. We call that Christianity. So I think it's similar where like, I think for sometimes, like in certain circles, like for me, that image had been like to do that, to really give your whole life to God, it means priesthood. Not like the ordinary vocation of all the baptized faithful. And I think we're starting to do that a little bit too with professional Catholicism of like, if I want to really give my whole heart to God, I need to go somehow work for the church or be a missionary for one of these missionary organizations, or I need to, be a Catholic speaker. And I think we adopt these images of what it actually means to live the fullness of the gospel and then apply them to our lives and then wonder why they aren't working. I do think some people are called to it, right? Like, I think it's a very specific calling in people's lives to like, be in ministry as your profession as well too. But I think it should also be approached that way then. I don't think it should just be approached as like a career path that I choose because I get to combine my faith and work. It's like, is the Lord asking you to? So yeah, I'd say, is it all people? No. Like, are there some probably who are just kind of entrepreneurial and like building things and want to do creative work and think the only way to do that is ministry and would be better served by starting a business and employing people and building a Catholic culture in this business? 100%.
Yeah.
And I wrestle with that tension myself too, like all the time. I'm like, I think I would be in some ways just as happy doing that and like really just suffusing a business culture with the gospel. But then the Lord just keeps calling me back into mission. So yeah, I think it's just, that's the heart of it is, what are you called to?
Yeah, I think this idea, I mean, the whole point that you say is like, if you want to do these things, that's just being Christian, right? That's what the priest said. And I think the dilemma we face is the entire framing that our culture approaches Catholicism or faith in general with is one where they are separated, right? So people assume that they have to, like, because of the framing we've been given, we assume that to quote unquote be fully committed means to do missionary work, which doesn't necessarily mean the case. Obviously, that could be, but it's about just bringing your life in its specifics completely to God, regardless if you're a business owner, you're an employee at McDonald's, or you're doing missionary work. It doesn't really matter. You should be bringing your faith fully to what you do. So I appreciate your stories here. Your illustrations are really, really good.
Yeah, so we make a distinction in theology too between an objectively higher calling and a subjectively one. Is it an objectively higher calling to live celibacy? Yes. Is it objectively higher or is it subjectively higher for you if you're not called to it? No. And I think that's where we get tripped up. It's like, it must be better to be working for the church or holier in some ways. It's like, not if God's not calling you to it.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're rejecting the call that he has for you, either way, regardless of what it is, that's not a good thing. So obviously you mentioned this already, that you were the CEO of the National Eucharistic Congress. You told us how that came about. I am curious. I've tried to promote daily mass and frequent adoration to a lot of the people in the Catholic founders community, entrepreneurs, and they tend to be very busy people. So oftentimes they make the excuse, hey, I just can't, I don't have the time to get to daily mass or whatnot. Can you just make your case to these people about the benefit of making this time commitment, even though they are busy?
Yeah, I think, there's the classic, who was it, Francis de Sales or someone that was like, pray a half hour a day. If you're busy, pray an hour a day. And I think that's the reality, right? Is we are so self-reliant, especially as Americans, especially as business owners. We are going to be, by temperament and by life circumstance, among the most self-reliant people in the world. And no matter what, if we live a life of self-reliance, we will wind up in our own personal hell of our own making. You know what I mean? Like we will have achieved all of our dreams and all of our ambitions, and we will be in a hell that we created. And so I think the practices of adoration, right? The receptivity that's found there to God's voice and his, perspective on the world, his vision for our lives, like how the Eucharist changes us to the extent that we have faith, right? Like the sacraments are not magic. The sacraments work in our lives, bear fruit in those who receive them with the required dispositions, the church says, right? So like when we bring to the practice of daily mass more than just the praxis of it, but actually the perspective that we're coming there to be broken open for the life of the world, the way the Eucharist is broken open for the life of the world. And that's, we want to make a gift of our lives, and we want to spend that time in love with the Lord. That encounter does transform us. And so, yeah, as people of influence, as Catholic business owners, like you have a responsibility and a mandate in the way that, like, if you heard your priest was like, I'm too busy, I don't pray anymore, you'd be like appalled, because you'd be like, for your own sake and your own soul, but you'd also be like, you're ministering to thousands of people every weekend. What are you doing? I'd say the same thing for Catholic business owners. If you're running a Catholic business, you shouldn't be praying a half hour a day. You should be praying an hour a day, and you should be trying to get to daily mass whenever you can, and confession as frequently as you can, because your bad decisions or your selfish decisions will have a more dramatic impact on the world around you because of the influence you have.
Yeah, that's a really powerful example. I think that I just really hope people noodle on that and consider it for themselves, because it has been to me really, really, really beneficial. Like especially when I go to midday mass, because like it helps me calm down the anxieties of business. Like, and I'm somebody who's prone to just rushing and going really quickly, and it just makes you stop and realize, well, at the end of the day, none of this actually matters. The only thing that really matters is eternity, and me looking at that crucifix and understanding what that means for us. So with anybody who does entrepreneurship, I find a lot of ways that God ends up speaking to us through our work. Can you tell us some of those stories? I mean, you've mentioned a few already, but like some of the most impactful things that God has taught you about how he engages with you and how you learn them through work.
Yeah, it's different in each role. I think I like your point even about midday mass of like, I think it is this great time of almost being able to find, we do. So I can be one of those people that tends to go to prayer and just worry the whole time. Like just be like, I'm not praying. I'm just looking inward at my own worries. And I think actually learning the discipline of prayer to like be in, the catechism says, right, the heart is the place where we encounter God. Like there is actually a call in prayer to find like the place in us that is especially attuned to the living God and just dwell there with him. Right. And so I think over time, that's probably been the biggest learning for me is to break that self-reliance and to totally surrender my life to God. I think with the Eucharistic Congress in particular, I really resonated with the story of the kind of the prophets and the Old Testament saints who are led on these journeys of their life, and their life is part of the story of what God is teaching them, but also the people of Israel, right? So like the story of Abraham in Genesis, right? From Genesis chapter 12 to 22, whatever it is, like that's a or 11, I guess. That's a 25-year journey that he's on. There's a period of time where God is silent to him for 17 years. And we flip over that stuff because we're just like, it's verse 1 to verse 2, that it happens. But Moses, right? And there's something he wants to accomplish in Moses, but also something he wants to do in Moses. And the two are linked. But the one is preeminent. Like he cares more about Moses's heart in some ways, right? Than he cares about, he cares about both, but like, he's not willing to do one without the other, and that there's an invitation in the midst of that to real suffering. So I think I've learned from some of those experiences, like leadership and what like real leadership looks like what does it take for the kingdom of heaven to break into this earth? I think it does require leaders who are willing to surrender their entire lives to God and suffer. Like I think the cross is the form of Christian fruitfulness. And God, those whom he loves, he reproves. Son though he was, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And when he was made perfect, he became a source of salvation for all. Like this is the path by which God shows us in Jesus how he wants to lead his sons and daughters in some ways. And this is not just an example for us, but an invitation if we're willing to lay hold of it. Like everyone I've met, with some of the projects, I've been able to meet some of the wealthiest people in the country who are some of the most, like the truly great men and women that I've ever met who have accomplished incredible things. And when you get them behind closed doors and you ask them their actual story of like, what they've done, they will tell you more about the seasons of suffering and the seasons of trust and the seasons of struggle than anything else. Like when I took the job at the Archdiocese of Denver, we had in our bank account 50% of what we needed to pay our rent the next week. You know what I mean? And these are just the things that like the Lord delights in these moments because like he's always got us and he's always going to catch us, but he can't abide our self-reliance and our self-serving. Like he really wants to find ways to prune our hearts to become just like ways he can pipe his own life into the world. And if we allow that, that's the difference between Mother Teresa and me. You know what I mean? Like that's the difference between John Paul II and me is they actually allowed that work to happen. But I think that call to greatness is not just for like the few and the proud. I think that's what baptism means. It's an invitation to that kind of death that would bring life to the entire world. And so I don't know. That's a lesson I feel like he's taught me over time.
No, I think this is a really interesting perspective that, we have to, as entrepreneurs, a lot of times, I think, I don't know if this is always the case, but a lot of people are drawn to entrepreneurship because they want to put money on the table, they want to do their own thing, they want to build things. And a lot of times there's some sort of chip on their shoulder. They're trying to achieve like a large outcome. They want to be a millionaire, which I don't think there's anything wrong with those things, but you need to recognize that in itself is not a measure of the true success, because we're not measured based on financial success, right? We're measured based on how much we commit to God, and allowing those tough times is like you said, a way to prune our hearts, and we should accept that because at the end of the day, it is good for us, right? And maybe if we're holy enough and we spend enough time praying and reflecting, we'll have the pruning happen without the financial pruning. But don't reject it is the point. So I like that a lot. I think this is
to your point, like
powerful.
I think I don't think God minds our mixed motivations for a period of time. Like it's funny looking in my own life, there is a desire to do great things, right? And a lot of that is pure-hearted for the sake of the church, right? Ambitious for God and his kingdom. I'm sure other parts of that are not completely pure-hearted. And I know for a fact that some of them were drawn from my own experiences of like woundedness, like frustration with the church or, my own personal upbringing or whatever, right? Like I can see in my own heart. And it's funny how for a season of time, one of the things, the peace the Lord gave me is that like he allowed those things and even used them in some ways to motivate me to actually do great things. Sometimes I get kind of almost frustrated by this image of like the Catholic husband and father that's just like, I try to work the job that doesn't require any effort from me so that I can focus on my family. And I'm like, surely we can do both. Like, surely we can still be good husbands and fathers and mothers and also like, have great callings in our life that are not necessarily, like I want my kids to see that like dad tried hard to do things in the world, too. And, but so I'm sure the Lord used that as motivation over time, but then also at the same time, at a certain point, like began to purify that in me through suffering, like, and didn't allow me to just, I've seen this happen too many times of like, people start in the spirit and they end in the flesh because they never let the Lord take them on that journey of suffering. So they have these great motivations in ministry, and then they're founders of ministries that are doing all this great work, and you meet them and you're like, no, like I don't want to be that at all. And I think that's the difference is, are we going to allow the Lord to eventually strip our hearts of those mixed motivations? But I don't think he minds them for a season. I think he sometimes even uses our weaknesses to spur us on.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think it's he's not going to reject the humanity aspect of us, right? He knows that and he accepts that. It's not a card to just do whatever you want, but it is something that you have to, if somebody who struggles with scrupulosity, that would be a little more difficult. But once you accept that he plays into those things, you can actually really go a long ways. One other major topic, and then we'll shift into rapid fire to wrap things up here, is in ministry, I always imagine, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but there's some kind of, you have to deal with the anxiety or learn how to not be anxious about putting food on the table, like being able to bring in the money to put the food on the table. And I think the same thing could probably be applied to entrepreneurs in some cases too. So do you have any kind of experiences with that or frameworks that you thought about that from, okay, here's how we're going to put money on the table, we're going to leave it in God's hands, and then the ways that you would apply that to the entrepreneur side of things?
Yeah, these are great questions. I do think that's very, very real. I think Jesus is very patient with us, but I remember in college sitting with a group of guys at a table, realizing I'd switched my major to philosophy and theology, and then feeling like maybe, I wasn't sure. Was I called to be a priest? Was I called to get married? And be like, how do you do that though? Like, how do you have a family? Is it almost like unfair to try to work in ministry and also have a family? I've seen the Lord always provide. But there's been a lot of seasons of life that I struggled with it. You know, as I watched friends in our late 20s start to like buy houses and do different things and feeling like has what I've been called to limited my family? Like am I taking from my family in some ways by not just, you know, finding a job in the secular world? And I think even today, right, we have 4 kids and we live in Denver, Colorado, which is an expensive city. And so as we pray through, you know, sort of like different steps there, we realize that we're not like sort of totally free to just like do whatever, because there is a certain amount that I have to make for us to have a house, you know, and stuff that we live in. I have always seen the Lord provide. My dad said this recently. He was, you know, and I think that's part of it is growing up, there was a fair amount of like financial anxiety in our home. And my dad admits that like he was a poor kid from the south side of Chicago, you know, like who, you know, he was a financial analyst for AT&T and did fine enough, but like, you know, we were always kind of watching it in some ways, right, with 6 kids and everything. And I remember him saying, you know, he's on the other side of that now. He retired and he actually works as a case manager now for one of the local like micro shelter, like micro home communities for some of the homeless population that's moved into Denver. And the last 5 years, we've really seen an uptick in it. And he loves it. It's like a passion project for him, and he gets to give, and he makes, you know, like I think they pay him, but it's more about like what he wants to do in his retirement. And he was just saying the other day on Father's Day, my wife asked both of us, like, what would you say you've learned? Like, I've been a father for almost 10 years now. My dad, you know, for 40 years almost. My dad's was like, I wish I'd worried less about money over time. Like he said, it felt like there was never enough. And anytime we got more, it felt like it was not enough either. And then I look back now and say, the Lord took care of us every step of the way, and we were always going to be okay. And I just wish I hadn't wasted as much time worrying about it. So I do think there's a truth to that. Is like, if you're called to ministry for as long as you're called to ministry, like the Lord will provide. There are, it is different, right? Like you have to accept the sacrifice. I've seen too many people try to live it both ways, of almost like, I want the comfortable suburban 9-to-5 life and to work in ministry. And like, you just can't have both. You're making trade-offs, but like, so be aware of the trade-offs that you're making. But we've never, you know, not eaten, and you know, the Lord is always taking care of us. But it is a reality that we wrestle with, right? Like if I was a Protestant, I would just go be a pastor and probably make a good living, and you know what I mean? Like it would be a lot easier in some ways and get to just serve one local church community. For us, it's different in the Catholic Church in some ways, you know.
Yeah, I think that the perspective about the money piece is interesting, because on one hand, we need to not worry about it, but we can't just be like, oh yeah, it's all going to be all right, and we'll just blow all the money we have, right? There has to be like, there's this way of approaching it. And I find it's a difficult fine line where you try to approach it from a like, let's be frugal perspective. We don't need to, you know, spend all this money, but also let's have some thought about it, but let's not worry and think about it all the time.
Yeah.
Because if you go the other way, then you're like, oh well, you know, we didn't have money for that sandwich that you bought, like that wasn't in the budget, right? And then it can cause so many tensions when it's like, hey, in some cases, like we're working and planning our move to Nashville, and it's like, okay, so when should we make it financially? When does that make sense to do? And part of me is like, well, I don't think it really matters. Like I'm just gonna, I know that that's where we're gonna go, and I'm just gonna do it, and I'm sure that it's gonna work out, because you know, maybe work will tick up at that point. I don't know. I'm not trying to be presumptive, but I'm not too worried about it. But it's always from being a new father and a new husband. It's like learning how to walk that line is difficult, especially as an entrepreneur, because you're like, well, it could be great. Yeah, we could just start crushing it and grow and double in size, but also it could not go well. So I appreciate you sharing the perspective there. And my framework for everybody is just, hey, do your best, be smart, be frugal, use your brain about it, but don't spend all the time worrying, because God will take care of you, right? Like just like the lilies of the field, right?
Yeah, I didn't feel it until we had our first kid, for sure.
Yeah.
Until then, I was like, oh, we're fine, and we're both working and all this stuff. And then we had that little girl, and I was like, oh, like it changed things. And I think in some ways, even that was part of my motivation in starting Alto, is like, you know, I'm capped working for a parish at what I can make. And there probably are ways I pushed myself, just partly out of a sense of, I feel called to stay in ministry for a long time and I need to provide. And so I need to look for creative ways to do that and to use all my gifts and try to pair the two together. But I've seen this so many times too, to your point, even in the secular world. I think one of the lies is like, if we choose that path, then we can control all of the financial variables too. And like people get laid off. You know what I mean? Like people, like we are never in control, no matter how much, if we've set up our perfect plan and we know how it's going to happen and we're going to retire by 50 using this plan, like it's an illusion that we can just like do everything exactly how we want it to do. And yeah, we're going to move at this perfect time because we're going to have exactly the amount of money we need and nothing's going to go wrong. And then people wait and they miss the housing market or they whatever. It's like there is a degree of, like you said, like, it's wise as serpents, innocent as doves, right? Like be really smart about how you handle and provide for, like try to step into God's plan for the provision of your life. But at the end of the day, don't forget that you have a father. Like you're not an orphan. God is, whose job is it to take care of your family? It's not mom's and it's not dad's. It's your heavenly father's job to take care of your family. And he's given you something to steward and to not be wasteful about, their talents to not bury, but goodness gracious, at the end of the day, the Lord is king of heaven and earth, and he has all the money in the world. And if you're like faithful and smart and open to his plan, like he's not going to drop you completely. And I've just seen that happen too many times both ways. People who thought they had it all figured out, who then it goes away, or people who were like just, it was in tough circumstances. And then the Lord just comes through at the last minute. He always lets us wait longer than we want, but he always comes through.
Yeah, he does. That's for sure. All right, man. Well, let's shift over to rapid fire and wrap this thing up. What are some of your favorite scriptures or readings that really inspire you, at least specifically from a kind of the trust in the Lord, entrepreneurship perspective of the ups and downs?
Yeah, like I said, I really do think the Old Testament characters, Abraham, Moses, like look at their lives and how the Lord leads them, and you'll see a lot of lessons for entrepreneurship.
Okay, got it. And then who are some of your favorite entrepreneurs, and why do they inspire you?
The saints, like, I think to be honest with you, Mother Teresa, John Paul II, I think they're all entrepreneurs in some ways.
Yeah, this is something I think is an underrated fact of life, is that we forget that saints are basically entrepreneurs, right? They may not have been building just for financial gain or whatever, but they were building. They were doing the hard thing, right? And my next question was going to be, who are your favorite saints? So maybe we got a few to add there.
Yeah, Francis, Therese is great. I love Therese. I've been on a big St. Peter kick lately. Weirdly, like he's just kind of calling out to me this year.
Yeah, I like that idea of the kind of saints for the seasons, right? You don't have to have one saint that you're dedicated to all the time, right? Obviously, they like that, but you can shift it up a little bit, right? And then what is one of your favorite devotions that kind of grounds you throughout your experiences, doing ministry and doing entrepreneurship?
Yeah, the Novena of Trust and Surrender, and then the Total Consecration to Mary. Those have been my two. Every new project I start it with an organization-wide consecration to the Blessed Mother, and she's never let me down yet. And then in seasons where you're not sure of God's plan, it's the Novena of, am I saying that right? The Novena of Trust and Surrender. It's kind of early in the morning.
I think that's correct.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Our Lady, you can never go wrong with that. She always takes care of things, right? She gets business done.
Amen.
Awesome, man. And then I guess you already mentioned your books. You gave us a little bit of plug there, but is there any other kind of call to action or offers or where people can reach you if you have anything to share with them?
Yeah. Check out amazingparish.org. We basically coach pastors through transforming their parish and, leading in their priesthood the way that they always wanted to, and the way that maybe seminary didn't always like specifically prepare them to do. So it's a really beautiful ministry that has a remarkable impact on priests. So check us out there. TimGlemkowski.com is sort of my personal website with some different projects there. And I would just say those two.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, man. This has been an absolute pleasure. I'm looking forward to the work you guys continue to do.
Thanks, brother. Good. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this, leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast player, and then give us a follow on YouTube. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers so that we can become monetized. And if you have not already, check out The Saintly CEO, our free weekly newsletter that comes out every Monday, and in under 1,000 words helps you with a little bit of tactical advice on how to run your business like a saint. So if you prefer to read, well, I don't know why you're listening to this if you prefer to read. Check it out. It's free. It comes out every Monday, and it will help you discover other Catholic entrepreneurs as well. We have a curated list of other entrepreneurs building Catholic ventures on there called the Heavenly Hustlers. So check that out. And then finally, if you are looking for a group of other Catholic entrepreneurs, consider joining our Catholic Founders peer group. It's $10 a month or $100 a year. Just go to Substack and upgrade to paid. You will also, as part of this, get access to all of our paywalled content. And I should note that recently we launched a directory for the Catholic Founders Guild. So that way, if you need specific advice on any particular topic or whatnot, you can ask the group. There's a lot of deep advice and expertise there where you can learn from others, have some camaraderie with others who are going through the same problems as you, people who really want to put the faith in the center of how they run their businesses. So it's a great place to be. I'm a little biased because I enjoy putting this group together. But thank you so much for tuning in today, guys. God bless you, and we'll see you next time on Catholic Founders.